Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Ecoffee with Experts. I'm your host, Matt Fraser. And on today's show, I have with me Mike Nink. Mike is the Vice President of Account Services and Operations at MODintelechy. Say that really fast, 10 times. He has over 2 decades of experience working with clients such as Dell, Rackspace, AT&T, and Adobe to produce advertising, demand generation, and online campaigns on regional and global platforms. Away from his desk, Mike stays active in the Austin community as a Cub Scout den leader. He can also be found rooting for Texas Longhorn football, tending to the family garden, or teaching his 2 boys how to play blackjack. That is awesome. Thanks, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, do you go by Michael or Mike? I apologize.
As a child born in the 70s, I answer to both Mike or Michael, but I usually go by Mike.
Okay, good. Okay. My name's Matthew, but I go by Matt. So you and I were talking before or communicating before, and you touched on the subject of talking about why marketing and sales teams must align to drive better business outcomes. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience in working with sales and marketing teams?
Absolutely. So I've been working on the marketing side for both agencies as well as internal in-house for about 20 years. Most of it's been on the agency side. So I've had the opportunity to see across lots of different clients. Normally we're brought in from the marketing perspective to help the marketing team. And a lot of times as we're kind of diving in to understand the problems and what solutions we could help with, we start realizing that really there's a challenge from the marketing side, but there's also usually a big disconnect when it goes to sales as well. And I've seen that time again with different companies where marketing has their idea of what they need to be accomplishing. They have their goals that they're marching towards, and that doesn't necessarily always align with sales and what sales is trying to accomplish. Nor does like a feedback loop really a lot of times exist between the two organizations either. Sales is out talking to the customers. They have the best beat on what the customers are responding to, and that information can be valuable to marketing. And you see time and again, I think it's just kind of more of a communication gap and misalignment when it comes to goals. They're trying each group's trying to hit their KPIs that they're being measured on, and missing the mark on the larger goal for the business as a whole of what needs to happen.
So you mentioned that is a commonality you've seen when working with clients. What about in the agencies that you've worked in? Has there been a disconnect between the marketing team for the actual agency and the sales force for the agency, or is that easily solved because it's all under one roof?
I haven't experienced that personally. I've also, worked with a lot smaller agencies, than versus larger agencies. So with a smaller agency, we're all in the same room having the same conversations every single week. And so I think there's a lot of alignment there, which I think that's where it comes back to, is that communication cycle of just having everybody, in touch with what's happening.
So that being said, then, how can businesses create an effective sales and marketing team that is integrated? What would be one of the first steps?
One of the first steps. I think when you talk about having an integrated sales and marketing team, what first comes to mind for me is having the two teams on the same page from a communications perspective. And having a shared goal in mind between the two of them. Market, yes, they are typically their own departments, but the two really need to be having a back and forth, two-way communication between each group as far as what they're trying to accomplish. Marketing's off generating campaigns and trying to identify like what they feel like they need to be doing to drive leads. They're potentially being measured on traffic to the site or form fills or things of that nature. And sales is being measured on conversions. The problem that actually happened is, when sales when sales is receiving leads, if the leads aren't the right quality, if they're not the right kind of lead, they'll get rejected. And unless there's a communication back to marketing, marketing doesn't know they're doing anything wrong. So I think when you talk about like how do you get them into alignment, I think the first part is, understanding who the customer is that you're trying to reach. What is that buyer persona? Agreeing on that buyer persona. Different people, different personas are going to purchase differently. They're going to engage with marketing differently. So having agreement on who the buyers are is one of the first steps. And then from there, understanding what the process should be between sales and marketing. When do leads flow into sales from marketing to sales? Like when do you go from a marketing, qualified lead to a sales accepted lead and then to a sales qualified? Is it a number of engagements that you've had with marketing? Is it, lead scoring? Ideally, it's lead scoring. But, different businesses are going to have different requirements. And then having a feedback loop from sales back to marketing. I think those are the first three that I would start with on trying to really kind of align the two groups together. Okay, so just to reiterate, so that I heard you correctly, you said number one, and so I'm paying attention. You said number one, creating an agreed upon buyer persona. That's like the foundation, because then did you get the right customer, the right lead and type of person interested in the product? Because if taking this, I have a background in car dealer marketing, so taking this, somebody who's submitting a lead for interested in a truck, but like they don't want to buy a Toyota truck, they want to buy a Ford truck, and yet you kind of getting the wrong persona. And then you talked about the last thing you talked about was feedback loop, and the one in between there, who owns the part of the when does marketing, I guess essentially when does marketing begin and end and sales take over, and the responsibilities, I guess, of the customer journey and using lead scoring to do that. So there's a lot to unpack there. So personas, I just had my last guest talk all about buyer personas. So I guess I'll refer people to talk to that episode, but it's so, I worked at a car dealership, and I won't say who they were, and they were they're one of the, they're not a small dealership, but they're not the biggest in the world. And they didn't even have personas for who was interested in each specific type of vehicle that they were selling, which just blows my mind away, to be frank with you, even to this day. So it's very important. And what do you think about, like, for instance, the value that sales can bring, because they're so directly connected to the customer in regards to fleshing out who that darn persona is. If they're being diligent in getting that data and putting it in the CRM, because in my experience, that was a really big hurdle. That is a huge hurdle, is the data component of it. That feedback loop in the data, that's always going to be, any kind of marketing you do, it's only going to be as good as the data that you have, whether it's on the personas or the prospects, the business that you're trying to go. If you're talking about ABM marketing, or if you're talking about direct to consumer, direct to buyer, and what that persona looks like. You're right. I mean, sales, they have the direct connection. They're the ones talking to the prospects. They're the ones understanding what are the pain points that would make somebody want to buy the product. And it's trying to identify, there's going to be different kinds of buyers out there. So trying to identify, like, how can we put these buyers into these buckets, into these personas? What is the ideal customer profile going to look like? And what is that engagement going to look like? In sales, we talk about their data that they have. They understand when they're talking to a prospect, what level of education does that prospect need to have about the product by the time they get there to really kind of help that sales process. Do they need to, do they need to have engaged with multiple pieces of information before they get there, or can it be more of a cold lead, and they can do the education on their part? And I think that all that ties back to marketing and what marketing can do to help that process.
So, how can marketing help sales achieve their goals then?
I mean, it depends on. The first part is just making sure that we're marketing to the right prospects, to the right audience.
Okay.
If we're all aligned on what that buyer persona is, then it makes it easier for us from a marketer perspective to understand who do we need to be targeting, where are we targeting them, and then what is the message. A lot of times, you kind of go into it thinking, okay, our message needs to be X. And this is where I think having that feedback from sales is extremely valuable, is understanding what are they hearing from prospects? Like what made that prospect or that lead, come through, click through, fill out a form, want to talk to us, want to buy from us. What is that? What information can we glean from that can help us tailor our messaging and our campaigns from a marketing perspective to better target and better influence other buyers that are in a similar situation? I think that's the start of it. After that, it's all about how do we keep them engaged? And this goes back to kind of that lead scoring model of what can we do? How much engagement do we need to have before we feel like that prospect is ready to move over to sales? Because, yes, you can have somebody fill out a form and say, okay, hey, they're qualified, and shoot them over to sales, but are they truly, really qualified? I mean, are they ready to have that sales conversation, or is sales going to get them and basically think, okay, yeah, they filled out a form, but they are nowhere near the right audience, the right contact, or the right level of interest at this point in time to buy. And that goes back to making sure that we're all aligned on what qualifies as an actual appropriate lead to move over to sales from marketing.
So do you think that there can be lead nurturing campaigns that can be set up to move the persona along the journey, they're calling it now, customer journey or funnel?
That is
to get them
great idea.
and closer and closer to actually being an educated in market, ready to buy hot ass prospects.
Absolutely.
Excuse my language.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it's a crazy marketing science that we have now to identify like what people are engaging with and what they're not engaging with, to be able to kind of move them through a pipeline to really kind of educate them and get them ready for sales. There's lots of different tools out there. There's different ways to kind of slice and dice it. But at the end of the day, it's all about, making sure that we're nurturing those leads in the right way, with the right content and with the right cadence to keep them engaged, educate them, and prep them to the point where, when we hand them off to sales, they are warm and they are interested and they are, they're primed and ready to buy at that point in time.
And what are some tools? You mentioned the word tools. What are some tools that in your experience are effective for doing this?
I mean, from a nurturing standpoint, there's several different kinds of marketing automation tools that are out there. Everything from enterprise level Eloqua to would be probably more small, medium business. Things that work using HubSpot from a marketing perspective, or from a marketing automation perspective. Marketo, Pardot. Even Zoho, which is used by a lot of smaller businesses, which is a CRM system that has some marketing automation capabilities as part of it. Each one, the way they all have a similar function in how they work. How they do it is kind of different across each of the different platforms. And that's from how do we set up nurturing campaigns that can feed those prospects the right information and kind of keep them engaged. the next part of the technology platform is, actually having the CRM system so we can keep them tracked. We can share that information with sales, so sales can see what campaigns have they been a part of, what have they been touched with, what information have they received and engaged with. What information do we have on them? Everything from, name, address, region, things of that nature. And then, when we talk about technology, there's third-party systems that can also be used to help, lack of a better word, kind of fill in the gaps of information that doesn't maybe exist already, using platforms such as, Demandbase or ZoomInfo or, even LinkedIn Navigator to kind of help fill in gaps of information that we may not have on a prospect that will, it's great for us from a marketing perspective, but is the information that would be valuable for sales to have.
Well, I'll put this to you then. What do you think sales can do to help marketing achieve their goals?
What can sales do? So, one of the things, and I think we talked about this a little earlier before we start the call is, when sales gets leads, sales needs to engage with those leads, and hopefully, we've walked through the process. You talk about kind of what can the two teams do together to work closely together? It starts off with identifying like what the process should be for when we send leads over and what those leads look like, and we're all in agreement on what's going to be considered qualified or not qualified. But when those leads come over, marketing's expectations is that sales is engaging with those leads, and that they are starting to reach out to them. If they're not, we all know those leads are just going to get colder and colder, and to the point where they're not going to be of any value. And so I think that's the first part is like, sales needs to engage with the leads, because we're working under the assumption that that the leads that we're sending over, we're all agreed to are the qualified leads. I think the next thing that sales can do to help marketing is provide feedback. I mean, I would encourage every marketer to attend the sales meetings. Go listen to what they're talking about in their meetings, what they're talking about from their quota, from challenges they're having. That information can be extremely valuable to a marketer. Now, is it going to help the marketer hit their goals? Yes and no. I mean, maybe not right away, but it could help the marketer realign to what their goals should be if they're not right, based on sales. I mean, sales is essentially client number one for marketing. Our job is to help them do their job, and I've seen extremely valuable information and insights come out of attending sales meetings. To the point of like, where you just need to demand to have a seat at the table to understand what they're saying. But it's also an opportunity for you to share what you're planning to do from a marketing perspective with sales, so that they can get a better idea and they're in alignment with what you're planning to execute and what to expect for leads coming in. And it really kind of helps establish that communication and that trust between the two organizations.
Yeah, that's incredibly valuable, because as I was sharing to you before we started the call here, I worked in the car industry for 7 years, and on both sides as a salesperson, internet sales manager, and the marketing director. And so I know I've done both, and I know how to do both. And I attended those sales meetings as a marketing director, but I felt the tension, to be quite frank with you, because I was generating leads for these guys, and they weren't engaging with the leads, and as a result, weren't selling them. And as a result, when they went and looked back at their CRM and their data, and they realized, hey, here's a customer, here's a prospect that if we'd been a little bit more attentive to, we could have sold them, we could have made our bonuses. And so, it's just interesting. So, it's valuable. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and we all know, I mean, not every lead that marketing sends over to sales is going to be a home run. No. And I think that's what sales needs to be able to tell us back of,
hey,
great. Why why did this work? Why did this one work versus this other one? But it's also important to have, marketing understand, like, we need to have some kind of way to, maybe the lead's not ready. Maybe it was, maybe, yes, it scored correctly, but they're just not ready. Have remarketing efforts back to them, re-nurture programs that set up that sales can send leads back to. But it all comes back to making sure that we have, the technology flag right between the CRM and the marketing automation systems to be able to identify and send those leads back and forth between the two groups.
Because as much as software and automation can do things, you still need the sales department to grab that drop down on that contact record and say not qualified, not ready, in order to trigger the campaign. That cannot be done automatically.
Absolutely. And, it's one of the things we're always talking to clients about when we're consulting on, CRM system and marketing automation system integrations is, what is the, yes, everybody wants to have an automated process, but what does the process look like before you automate it? Like, how are things working without those systems in place? Because you can't just go create a system and say this is going to work if you can't do it, if you don't have a process in place for the two teams to work together without automation, just automating something is not going to be the right answer. So
So in other words, one of the keys is to actually map out the sales and marketing processes
and be realistic about what that
looks like. And then it also gives you a foundation and a map in order to create the key events and the KPIs that go in and the things that need to happen, where marketing automation can fill in the gaps and do those things, and where you need actual manual input of individuals, whether it's the sales team or the marketing team.
Correct. And, I think before we started talking, I said, the experience I have is like, I don't think anything is going to be completely, is it going to be rocket science or completely, a completely new revelation on how things work? But you'd be surprised at how many times we've talked with clients, we've gone into situations where that kind of information doesn't exist. And, it's one of those things, like, it's kind of the basic to start with. But it sometimes those basic parts get overlooked for, the shiny or new things that people are trying to accomplish, or just sometimes just how do we keep the lights on from a business perspective, and just keep sales going and keep leads flowing in without really thinking through, like, what should the process really be to make all this work seamlessly.
And I'm not sure that, to be frank with you, everybody has that. Like, not everybody has all of the skill sets that are required to be able to do that. So I think that's where people like you and I can come in with, especially with an outside, maybe a set of eyes to, like, even go through the process as a ghost buyer. And I think that certain people are gifted at certain things, because I've learned from talking to other people that some of the things I'm gifted at, they're like, Matt, not everybody can do that. Like what you're talking about, creating system processes and maps and envisioning it all out. Like, there's no way I could ever do that. But yet, on the same hand, there's other things that people are good at that I'm not good at, like fixing cars. But anyway, but even in the capacity of our industry of marketing, you can't be good at everything. So, now we talked about the personas, we talked about the marketing process or the customer journey, and deciding who's responsible for what part of the journey, creating a map around that, and deciding who's going to be responsible for what, and what the lead scoring is going to be from the marketing side, what the qualifications are going to be in the events, and what you need sales to do. But then we talked, you mentioned the feedback loop, which is where I'm going right now. How can a feedback, what strategies have you seen to create an effective feedback loop between sales and marketing teams? I read of one individual who said that you should create a representative in the business between the sales, a liaison, if you will, between the sales and marketing departments. I don't know. I'd love to hear your insights.
I think there's different ways to do it depending on the business and what works best for the business. But a liaison is kind of would be probably the easiest way to go about doing that, where you identify one person from each department to engage and share information back and forth. That feedback loop that I talked about, that kind of goes back to where I was saying it's like, as a marketer, you should ask or to demand to be allowed to be into the sales meetings, because that's part of that feedback loop. Being able to hear what they're saying, what they're getting from the customers, just having, one-on-one conversations with sales reps, depending on the size of the company, some companies, they have 1,000 sales reps. Having those one-on-one conversations is not feasible or realistic. But having, a representative from that, to your point about the liaison, that totally works. If you're a smaller company, you could have situations where you could have the sales reps all in one meeting and pull everybody together and have marketing represented there to ask questions of what they're seeing work with sales reps. I was in a situation where I went down and spent a week with one of our clients' sales teams to better understand what the process looked like from their end. Like, I spent an entire week there where I basically was embedded with them and watched how the leads came into the system, how they called them, how they emailed them, how they engaged with them, what the process looked like on their end when they were developing quotes, what the limitations were, there were assumptions that we made in our rooms when we're talking about marketing that, were kind of blown out of the water when we see kind of actual real world execution of it, of what the sales reps could and could not do. And then, we had basically a forum where we pulled everybody together in the room and we said, walked them through and said, this is the program that we roll out. This is what this looks like. This is what your customers, your prospects receive from us. Would love to get y'all's feedback on, what you think from from a messaging perspective, from a timing perspective, like what are you hearing from them as far as what's working and what's not working? So there's different ways to do it. It just comes back to figuring out what's the right cadence? Is it a monthly, weekly cadence? What information is the most valuable for you to get back? Is it information on the quality of the leads? That definitely should be, one of the top things in my opinion. But then also what's the words, the language that prospects are using to engage with us, that we can then turn that into content or revise our content to better align to how people speak about us. So a couple different ways to look at that.
Hey, Mike, what about, creating custom fields in the CRM that are based on conditional logic that appear so that the salesperson and representative can select the drop down for the rating of the lead or the qualification, like not qualified or needs more nurturing or whatever that label may be. And then fields coming up for them to be able to enter the data, and then creating a process, again, using software that could extract that data from the CRM into a report. Whether you're taking that out of the CRM or into that software, into a Google Doc, or using tools that you and I are aware of, and creating a report that the marketing manager sales manager can talk about.
I think that's an extremely valuable way to do it. I think the one challenge, exactly.
You can't get salespeople to do anything in the CRM.
the one challenge with that is, I guess it's multi-tiered challenges. Depending on the organization, getting all those custom fields added to the CRM, but then having people actually use it. And use it correctly. But in theory, it's great. I think it comes down to, I would say that probably the smaller the sales organization, probably the easier that is to probably execute. It's just making sure that the sales team is also trained on what to expect. That's an expectation of what they have to do that as part of their job. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't understand why salespeople, I worked on the sales floor, different, and I was the CRM. What's the word I'm looking for? Aficionado. I used the CRM as a salesperson because I knew that it was going to help me make me money, and I do not understand why salespeople are so now. Forgive my limited experience. I've not worked in hundreds and 20. I haven't got 20 years of experience working in hundreds of different companies, but from what I saw in my experience, it's like, and from what I heard in industry meetings, like I went to conferences, for instance, I saw a keynote speaker give the entire audience hell, and he used different words than that, asking them why the flip they are spending $4,000 a month on CRM software that they're not even using. Like, might as well just go flush it down the toilet. So I just don't understand. It's such a valuable tool and can make salespeople money if they use it properly. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's actually case studies and data that show that salespeople who use the CRM religiously close more deals.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen those same numbers. I've seen that same research, but I've also experienced exactly, what you had heard, which is, you have these CRM systems, but, all the information maybe not necessarily kept in there for one reason or another. That, some sales reps would keep it on an Excel spreadsheet on their desktop.
That is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
When I think of what CRM is capable, why you would do that.
That goes more to like just training the sales team on why to use the CRM. I mean, I could probably think of at least 10 reasons why people wouldn't want to use the CRM.
One, they don't know how.
It's just don't know how, or technical challenge, or there's fear that well, if I put all my information in there, do they really need me to do this, goodness. Or can somebody else come in, can just take my seat and log in, just take my leads. There's lots of different reasons why not, but if we all understand that, for the greater good of the company that we're working for, that, marketing is trying to do their job, sales is trying to do their job. If we can all make sure that we have accurate and, up-to-date information in the CRM system, then we can all do a better job and drive more revenue for the company. And that really should be the end goal for all the departments. So
absolutely. Hey, Mike, do you have any other advice or insights on this topic you'd like to share?
I mean, off the top of my head, there's a lot of areas that I could go into on it. But I would just say that a lot of times it feels like sometimes there's a us versus them mentality sometimes, between sales and marketing. And, I think I just want to reiterate, the more that we can work together, the more that we can break down those barriers and have communication and really understand like what we're trying to align on and what the other side's trying to align on really is for the better benefit of the company, is to drive more revenue for us all, then the better all of our lives are going to be. And it just takes reaching out across the aisle essentially to forge those relationships, forge those bonds with the other team, to really kind of start having those honest conversations. Get out of the clouds. Get down to brass tacks of, don't be afraid to, hurt somebody's feelings of saying these leads aren't good, but also be ready to justify why they're not good. And to really have some really hard, honest conversations about what's happening between sales and marketing.
Yeah. Hey, that's awesome. Would you say that would be like the one big takeaway you'd want our listeners to get from this episode? Or is there anything else you want to add?
I would say yes. Yeah. I would say, that's probably the biggest one. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's wise advice. So we've talked about, in order to align sales and marketing teams, you need to have them agree on the customer persona. You need to establish what the customer journey is and who's responsible for each part of the customer journey, where marketing begins and ends, and where where marketing begins and ends, and where sales takes over and ends, and who's responsible for what, and then creating a feedback loop as to why or why not that particular lead converted or did not convert, which we've explained some strategies, but I'm just trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Articulate what we talked about, because just to keep it in my head and for our audience. So those, some of the things you shared are just awesome. Like, I hope that I think there'll be tremendous value for people to listen and watch this and think of some strategies. of how they can implement it. And if people want to get in touch with you and want to connect with you, Mike, how can they go about doing that? Like LinkedIn, Twitter, something like that?
LinkedIn is the best way to engage with me.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. So we'll make sure to put your LinkedIn handle and URL in the show notes and so on and so forth, so people can do that if they want to. So hey, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It's just been a pleasure talking to you. Perhaps we can have you back again, and we can maybe dive into some other topics such as marketing automation or other such things that I know you're very knowledgeable about.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you again for having me, Matt.
No problem. Thanks a lot. You have a great day. Thank you, those of you who are watching, and make sure to tune in for next week's episode. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.